I was restocking the camping lanterns when my phone buzzed in my pocket. The caller ID read Mom. My heart skipped. 3 years, 2 months and 14 days since we'd last spoken properly. Not that I was counting. I let it ring once more before answering, giving myself time to breathe. Hello. My voice sounded foreign even to myself. Michael. Mom's voice was soft, hesitant. Is that you? As if she had other sons she might confuse me with. Yeah, Mom. It's me. A silence stretched between us, filled with years of unspoken words. I could hear her breathing, gathering courage. Your father doesn't know I'm calling. She lowered her voice. I'm turning 60 next Saturday. We're having a small party at the house. Nothing fancy, just family and a few neighbors. Another pause. I'd like you to come. I nearly dropped the box of inventory I was holding. 3 years of silence and now this? My free hand gripped the edge of the metal shelving unit. Mom, I don't think. Just think about it, she interrupted. It would mean a lot to me. After we hung up, I stood frozen in aisle 3, surrounded by camping gear and emergency supplies. The invitation replayed in my mind. Mom's birthday party. The house I grew up in. The family that hadn't spoken to me since I'd walked away from the future they'd planned. Everything okay, boss? Dave called from the register. I nodded, not trusting my voice, and continued unpacking the shipment. Miller's Hardware wouldn't run itself, even if my world had just tilted on its axis. The real bomb dropped that evening. I was going through the day's receipts in my small office at the back of the store when my phone lit up again. This time the screen read, Dad. My stomach clenched. In 3 years he'd never once called. I let it ring longer this time, steeling myself for whatever was coming. Finally I answered. Michael. His voice was granite. Not a question, not a greeting. A statement. Dad. Your mother told me she called you. No pleasantries, straight to business. Typical Robert Miller. About her birthday. I waited. He expected me to fill the silence, but I refused to make this easier. Don't show your face at your mother's birthday. His words came like hammer blows. You're a disgrace. The familiar sting of his disapproval washed over me. Amazing how some things never change, how a few words could instantly transport me back to being the perpetual disappointment. Did Mom ask you to call and tell me that? I managed to keep my voice steady. She's too soft. Always has been. Especially with you. I heard ice cubes clink in a glass. You broke her heart when you threw away everything we worked for. I glanced around my small office. The framed business license on the wall. The photos of projects we'd completed for the community. The schedule with 15 employees' names carefully arranged for maximum efficiency. I didn't throw anything away, Dad. I built something different. A hardware store. He practically spat the words. When you could have been an engineer. When we paid for 3 years at Boston University. Another ice cube clinked. You quit to sell hammers. Is that what you think I do? I think you're a quitter. I think you took the easy way out. His voice hardened further. And I think your presence would ruin your mother's birthday. So stay away. The line went dead before I could respond. Classic Robert Miller. Always needed the last word. The next morning I arrived at Miller's Hardware earlier than usual. My conversation with Dad had left me restless and sleep had been elusive. I unlocked the front door at 5:30 a.m., 2 hours before opening, and flicked on the lights. The familiar smell of wood, metal, and the faint hint of motor oil greeted me. This place, my place, had been built from nothing but determination and a small business loan. A loan I'd paid off last year, 3 years ahead of schedule. I walked the aisles, running my fingers over the neatly organized inventory. Dad had called it selling hammers, as if that's all we did. He'd never bothered to understand. We didn't just sell tools, we solved problems. When the elementary school needed bookshelves but couldn't afford commercial options, we provided materials at cost and helped the PTA build them. When Hurricane Alice hit last fall, we stayed open 24/7 for a week, helping people secure homes and businesses. When the community center needed repairs, my team volunteered weekends to fix it up. I paused at our community board near the register, covered with thank you notes and photos. Mrs. Abernathy's repaired porch swing. The Martinez family's wheelchair ramp. The renovated playground at Washington Park. My phone buzzed with a text from Amy, my sister. Is it true? Are you coming Saturday? I hadn't decided yet. Could I face them all? The judgment? The disappointment? Dad's cold anger? Later that afternoon, while helping Mr. Peterson choose the right wood stain for his deck, I found myself thinking about college. Not with regret but with clarity. I'd been miserable at Boston University. Engineering had been Dad's dream, not mine. I'd sleepwalked through 3 years of classes, maintaining decent grades but feeling increasingly hollow. Then came that spring break when I helped Uncle Jack rebuild his garage. The satisfaction of creating something tangible, of solving practical problems. It awakened something in me I couldn't ignore. 2 weeks later, I withdrew from BU. Dad's reaction had been nuclear. "This is how you repay us?" he'd shouted across the living room. "We gave you everything." "I never asked for engineering," I tried to explain. "That was your plan." "And what's your brilliant plan? Throw away a degree? Waste our money? Become what? A handyman?" Mom had cried silently in the corner. Amy had watched wide-eyed from the stairs. "I'm going to start a business," I'd said. "Something this town actually needs." Dad had laughed, a cold sound without humor. "With what experience? What capital?" "I'll figure it out. You'll fail and then you'll come crawling back," he'd predicted. "And I won't be there to pick up the pieces." I never went back home after that night. I'd packed my car, crashed on Uncle Jack's couch and started mapping out a business plan. The town had lost its local hardware store when Home Depot opened on the highway. But the big box store lacked personalized service and community connection. I saw an opportunity. Uncle Jack co-signed my loan. I found a small storefront on Oak Street. Miller's Hardware opened 6 months later. That was 3 years ago. The first year had been brutal. 7-day workweeks, countless sleepless nights, and a profit margin so thin it was practically transparent. But we survived. Then thrived. When Home Depot closed their underperforming location last year, our business doubled. Dad had been wrong. I hadn't failed. I just hadn't succeeded on his terms. The day before Mom's birthday, I still hadn't decided whether to go. I was helping Jason, our newest employee, close up shop when he mentioned his plans for the weekend. "Got a big day tomorrow," he said while sweeping. "Meeting my girlfriend's family for the first time. Her mom's birthday party." "That's always nerve-wracking," I replied, counting the register. "First impressions and all." "Yeah, especially since her dad sounds intense." Jason laughed nervously. "Corporate type. Very success-oriented, according to Amy." My head snapped up. "Amy?" "Yeah. We met at the library. She's finishing her master's thesis." He grinned. "Smart as a whip and way out of my league." "Amy. My sister Amy. Master's program. It couldn't be a coincidence." "What's her last name?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "Miller. Amy Miller." Jason tilted his head. "Hey, same as you. That's funny, never made that connection before." I gripped the counter to steady myself. My sister was dating one of my employees. And tomorrow they were both going to my mother's birthday party. The party my father had explicitly banned me from attending. "You okay, boss? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I'm fine," I lied. "Just remembered something I forgot to do." After Jason left, I sat alone in the darkened store, contemplating this unexpected twist. If I went to the party, I'd not only face my father's wrath but also create an awkward situation for Jason. If I didn't go, I'd be letting Dad win again. Letting him dictate the terms of my relationship with the rest of my family. Mom wanted me there. Amy was clearly in contact with me again, even if secretly. And I was tired of being the family pariah, the cautionary tale, the disappointment. I pulled out my phone and typed a text to Mom. "I'll be there tomorrow. 2 p.m., right?" Her response came seconds later. "Yes. Thank you, Michael. It means everything." I took a deep breath and made my decision. Tomorrow I would face my family. I would face Dad. I would bring Mom a gift and wish her happy birthday. And whatever happened afterward, at least I would have stood my ground. No more hiding. No more avoiding. Tomorrow they would see me for who I really was. Not a disgrace, but a man who had built something meaningful on his own terms. I just didn't expect that the truth would come from Jason's innocent greeting. Sleep didn't come easy that night. I tossed and turned in my modest one-bedroom apartment above Gina's bakery, thinking about tomorrow's inevitable confrontation. Around 4:30 a.m. I gave up trying and decided to start my day. If I couldn't sleep, I might as well be productive. The streets of Mapleton were quiet as I walked the 3 blocks to Miller's Hardware. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten, a sliver of pale gold breaking through the darkness. I loved this time of day, the world still and expectant, full of possibility. The familiar jingle of my keys echoed in the empty street as I unlocked the front door. Flipping on the lights, I breathed in the comforting smell of sawdust, metal, and the faint hint of coffee from yesterday. This place had become more home to me than any house ever was. I started my morning routine, the rhythm of it soothing my anxious mind. First, a careful walkthrough of the entire store, checking for anything out of place. Then a review of yesterday's sales, noting what needed restocking. Next, updating the employee schedule posted by the break room. Dave had asked for Tuesday off to take his son to a doctor's appointment. Sarah needed extra hours to save for community college. These were the details that mattered to me now, the small human needs of people who depended on this place, on me. By 6 o'clock, I'd brewed fresh coffee in the small kitchenette and begun reviewing inventory. The spring gardening supplies were moving fast. We'd need to order more organic fertilizer and heirloom vegetable seeds. Mr. Wilson's special order woodworking tools had arrived and needed to be processed. Mrs. Henderson would be coming in for paint samples for her dining room renovation. The quiet hum of the air conditioning, the distant rumble of early morning traffic gradually increasing outside. These sounds had become the soundtrack of my life. A life my father couldn't understand or value. At precisely 7:30 a.m., Ellie arrived for her shift, her silver hair neatly pinned back, reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. At 72 she was my oldest employee and arguably my best. A widow with 40 years of bookkeeping experience, she'd walked in shortly after I opened, resume in hand, saying simply, "Young man, you need someone to manage your accounts and I need something to fill my days." She'd been right on both counts. "Morning, boss," she said, hanging her cardigan on the hook by the register. "You're here early." "Couldn't sleep," I admitted. She studied me with the keen eyes that never missed a decimal point in our ledgers. "Big day today, isn't it? Your mama's birthday." Word travels fast in small towns. I'd never explicitly told Ellie about my family situation, but somehow she knew the essentials. She had a way of understanding things without needing them spelled out. "Yeah," I sighed. "It's complicated. Family always is." She patted my arm. "Now about that Hamilton order. The invoice doesn't match what was delivered." And just like that we were back to business. That was what I loved about Ellie. No unnecessary dwelling on emotional matters. Just practical solutions and moving forward. The morning rush began at 8. Contractors picking up supplies for the day's jobs, homeowners grabbing what they needed for weekend projects, and the regular crowd of retirees who came as much for conversation as for merchandise. I moved through it all with practiced ease, answering questions, solving problems, making recommendations. "The deck stain you suggested worked perfectly, Michael," Mrs. Abernathy told me, showing photos on her phone. My daughter couldn't believe it was the same porch. "This dimmer switch isn't working right," Mr. Kelly complained, placing the item on the counter. "Installed it yesterday and it's already flickering." "Let's get you a replacement," I said, reaching under the counter for a new one. "And I'll show you a different brand that might work better for your setup." Around 11, a young man entered, looking slightly lost amid the aisles of tools and hardware. College-aged, with nervous eyes and a tentative posture, he reminded me a bit of myself before I'd found my purpose. He wandered the plumbing section, picking up and putting down various items with increasing confusion. "Can I help you find something?" I asked, approaching him with a friendly smile. Yes," he admitted with visible relief. "My apartment sink is leaking and my landlord says it'll be a week before he can fix it. I thought maybe I could try myself, but I don't really know what I'm doing." 10 minutes later I'd gathered everything he needed, drawn a simple diagram explaining how to replace the washer, and reassured him that he could handle it. "If you run into trouble, just bring your phone and video call the store. One of us can walk you through it," I offered. The young man, Jason, according to his credit card, looked at me with astonishment. "Seriously? You'd do that?" "Of course. That's what we're here for." He shook his head in wonder. "The big hardware store by the highway would never do that." "That's why they're not here anymore," I replied with a smile, "and we are." As I rang up his purchase, I noticed he was eyeing the help wanted sign in our window. We're looking for part-time help, I mentioned casually. Evenings and weekends mainly. Know anyone who might be interested? Jason straightened up. Actually, me? I need a job to help with tuition. I'm studying environmental science at Mapleton Community College. Something about his eagerness reminded me of myself at that age, before engineering school had nearly crushed my spirit. Before I'd realized that practical skills and helping people could be a legitimate career path. Have you ever worked retail before? I asked. No, but I learned fast. And I grew up helping my grandfather with projects around his farm. I know my way around basic tools. I handed him an application. Fill this out and we can talk more. That was how Jason Peters came to work at Miller's Hardware. His interview revealed a quick mind and genuine interest in learning. His first few shifts were a bit rocky. He mixed up inventory codes and struggled with the cash register. But his willingness to admit mistakes and his natural way with customers more than made up for the learning curve. Within a month he was handling basic customer questions on his own. By the 2-month mark he could identify most common hardware issues and suggest solutions. After 3 months, several regular customers asked for him by name. You've got a good eye for talent, Ellie remarked one evening as we watched Jason patiently explain water heater maintenance to an elderly couple. That boy's a keeper. I nodded in agreement. He reminds me of someone. Ellie gave me one of her knowing looks. You before life complicated things? I laughed. Is that your polite way of saying before I got cynical? You're not cynical, Michael, she corrected. You're cautious. There's a difference. Over the months, Jason became more than just an employee. He was eager to learn every aspect of the business, staying late to help with inventory, offering suggestions for store improvements, even drawing up plans for a workshop space where we could offer community classes. Why don't bigger stores do this? He asked one day as we finished hosting a free clinic on basic home plumbing. 20 people had attended, many of whom returned later to purchase supplies for their own projects. Because they're focused on selling products, not solving problems, I explained. They want volume, quick transactions. We're building relationships. Is that why you named it Miller's Hardware? He asked. To focus on the relationship aspect? Your name on the door means something personal. I paused, realizing he didn't know the story. Miller is my last name. This place is literally mine. My vision, my investment, my risk. Jason's eyes widened. Wow. That takes guts, putting everything on the line like that. If only my father could see it that way, I thought but didn't say. As spring turned to summer, Jason mentioned he'd started dating someone new. She's amazing, he told me while we restocked the electrical aisle. Brilliant. Studying psychology. Way out of my league. Nobody's out of your league, Jason, I assured him. You're a good guy with a solid future. He beamed at the compliment. Thanks, boss. That means a lot coming from you. I noticed he worked extra hard after that conversation, as if determined to live up to my assessment of him. He started coming in early, staying late, volunteering for the most challenging tasks. The store was thriving and in no small part due to his contributions. One Friday in late August as we closed up shop, Jason seemed unusually excited. Big date tomorrow, he explained, practically bouncing as he swept the floor. Meeting her family for the first time. Her mom's birthday party. That's always nerve-wracking, I said, counting out the register. First impressions and all. Yeah, especially since her dad sounds intense. He laughed nervously. Corporate type. Very success-oriented, according to Amy. That was when everything clicked into place. Amy, my sister. The master's program in psychology she'd mentioned in her occasional secret texts. It couldn't be coincidence. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Tomorrow worlds would collide in ways I couldn't have imagined. My carefully constructed life, separate from my family's disapproval, was about to intersect with the past I'd been trying to outrun. As Jason continued chatting, oblivious to my internal shock, I made my decision. I would go to that party. I would face my father. And when my employee, one of my success stories, called me boss in front of my family, perhaps they'd finally see what I'd built from nothing. Something real. Something valuable. Something entirely mine. Saturday arrived with perfect late summer weather, clear blue skies and a gentle breeze that carried the scent of Mrs. Rodriguez's roses from across the street. I stood in my bathroom staring at my reflection while adjusting my tie for the 5th time. The blue button-down shirt and khaki pants were new, purchased specifically for today. I wanted to look put together but not like I was trying too hard. The tie was perhaps overkill, I decided, removing it and tossing it onto the bed. The wrapped gift on my kitchen counter seemed simultaneously too much and not enough. A handcrafted wooden jewelry box I'd made myself from cherry wood, with Mom's initials inlaid in maple. Inside was a silver bracelet with a single charm, a tiny house representing the home she'd made for us despite everything. I checked my watch. 1:15 p.m. The drive to my parents' house in Oak Ridge Heights would take 20 minutes, which meant I needed to leave now to arrive fashionably on time. Not early enough to be caught alone with Dad, not late enough to make a dramatic entrance. My hands trembled slightly as I picked up the gift and my car keys. This was really happening. After 3 years of estrangement, I was returning to the house I grew up in, facing the family that had written me off as a failure. The drive was a blur of familiar landmarks that seemed smaller, somehow less significant than they had in my memories. The old movie theater where Amy and I had spent Saturday afternoons. The high school football field where Dad had pushed me to play despite my lack of interest or talent. The community park where Mom had taught me to identify different types of trees. As I turned onto Maple Avenue, my stomach tightened. The houses here were all similar, 2-story colonials with manicured lawns and 3-car garages. Symbols of middle-class success and stability. The kind of life my parents had always wanted, the kind they'd expected me to pursue. Number 347 looked exactly as I remembered. White with black shutters, pristine landscaping, American flag by the front door. Only the maple tree in the front yard had changed, grown taller and fuller in my absence. I'd helped Dad plant that tree when I was 10. I parked behind a silver Lexus I didn't recognize and sat for a moment, gathering my courage. Through the windshield I could see balloons tied to the mailbox and the front porch railing. Blue and white, Mom's favorite colors. Someone had gone to considerable effort to make this special for her. With a deep breath, I grabbed the gift and walked up the familiar stone path to the front door. Each step felt heavier than the last. Before I could second-guess myself, I rang the doorbell. The chimes echoed inside, the same Westminster melody from my childhood. Footsteps approached, and then the door swung open to reveal my mother. Weichel. Her voice was barely more than a whisper. She looked older than I remembered, fine lines around her eyes and mouth that hadn't been there before. Her blonde hair, once vibrant like Amy's, was now streaked with silver. But her blue eyes, my eyes, were exactly the same. For a heartbeat we simply stared at each other. Then she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me, a fierce hug that caught me by surprise. I stood frozen for a moment before returning the embrace, careful not to crush the gift between us. "You came," she murmured against my shoulder. "You really came." "Happy birthday, Mom," I managed, my voice rougher than I'd intended. She pulled back, wiping quickly at her eyes. "Let me look at you." Her gaze traveled over me, taking in the changes 3 years had wrought. I'd filled out since college, the physical labor of running a hardware store adding muscle to my once lanky frame. My hair was shorter, more practical. A small scar on my chin from a mishap with a bandsaw last winter. "You look good," she said finally. "Healthy." "Thanks." I extended the wrapped package. "This is for you." She accepted it with trembling hands. "You didn't have to bring anything." I wanted to. A tense silence fell between us, broken by the sound of voices from deeper in the house. The party was already underway. "Come in," she said suddenly, as if remembering her duties as hostess. "Everyone's in the backyard and living room." I followed her into the house, hit immediately by a wave of memories. The entryway with its polished hardwood floor. The formal living room to the right, rarely used except for holidays and special occasions. The family photos lining the hallway, many featuring me in younger, more compliant days. Mom paused, noticing my gaze on a graduation photo. Me in cap and gown after high school, Dad's arm around my shoulders, both of us smiling as if we shared the same vision for my future. "He was so proud that day," she said softly. I didn't respond. What could I say? That it had been the beginning of the end? That college had been the start of our unraveling? "Elizabeth?" Who was at the door? My father's voice boomed from the kitchen, followed by his footsteps. My breath caught as he appeared in the hallway. Robert Miller, Executive Vice President at Oak Ridge Financial, pillar of the community, my personal critic-in-chief. He stopped dead when he saw me, his expression cycling rapidly through surprise, anger, and finally a cold neutrality. Michael. Not a greeting. Not a welcome. Just an acknowledgement of my existence. Dad. I matched his tone exactly. Mom glanced anxiously between us. Robert, Michael brought me a birthday gift. Isn't that thoughtful? Dad's jaw tightened. I thought I made myself clear on the phone. You did, I replied evenly. Mom made herself clear too. It's her birthday. She wanted me here. A tense standoff followed, broken only when a voice called from the kitchen. Liz? The ice is running low. Should I run to the store? Aunt Susan appeared, stopping short when she saw me. Michael. Well, this is a surprise. Her genuine warmth broke some of the tension. Soon I was being ushered into the kitchen and backyard, where familiar faces registered varying degrees of shock at my presence. Uncle Jack, who'd helped me get started, gave me a subtle thumbs up. Cousin Beth hugged me awkwardly. Mr. and Mrs. Norton from next door nodded politely but seemed unsure how to react. Throughout it all, Dad maintained a strategic distance, engaging with other guests but never directly acknowledging me. Mom fluttered between us like a nervous butterfly, trying to smooth over a chasm too wide for her gentle efforts. I found myself backed into a corner of the deck, making small talk with Uncle Jack about the local baseball team's chances at the playoffs. You're doing good, kid, he said quietly during a lull in the conversation. The store's really something. Thanks, I replied, genuinely touched. For everything. Your dad'll come around, he assured me, though his expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. He's just stubborn. Like someone else I know. I smiled despite myself. Must be a Miller trait. Speaking of Millers, Uncle Jack nodded toward the sliding glass door. Here comes your sister. Amy stepped onto the deck, looking elegant in a simple blue dress, her blonde hair swept up in a twist. She froze when she saw me, eyes widening. For a terrible moment, I thought she might follow Dad's example and ignore me. Instead, she hurried over, wrapping me in a fierce hug. You actually came, she whispered. I wasn't sure you would. Seems to be the general consensus, I replied dryly. She pulled back, studying my face. You look good, Mike. Really good. So do you, Professor Almost Doctor. Her smile was radiant. 3 more months and I defend my dissertation. Then it's officially Dr. Miller. Dad must be thrilled. Amy's expression clouded slightly. He is. Though I sometimes think he would have preferred I go into business instead of psychology. At least you stuck with the program, I pointed out. Unlike some of us. Different paths, she said firmly. Which reminds me, I want you to meet someone. He should be here any minute. He's running late because... The doorbell chimed inside, cutting her off. That's probably him now, she said, a hint of nervousness creeping into her voice. He's really great, Mike. I think you'll like him. I smiled, deciding to keep my knowledge to myself for now. I'm sure I will. Amy hurried inside to answer the door. I used the moment to scan the backyard, cataloging the attendees. About 20 people total. Family, a few neighbors, some faces I didn't recognize who might be Mom's friends from her book club or Dad's colleagues. Mom was unwrapping a gift from Aunt Susan, a colorful scarf that brought genuine delight to her face. Dad stood nearby, playing the part of devoted husband, his arm around her shoulders as she held up the gift for everyone to admire. For a moment, they looked like the perfect couple from a magazine spread. Successful executive and his wife celebrate milestone birthday. The sliding door opened again and Amy emerged with Jason at her side. My employee was barely recognizable in dress slacks and a button-down shirt, hair neatly combed, clutching a bouquet of flowers that had definitely come from the upscale florist near campus, not the grocery store variety he could afford on his part-time wages. Everyone, Amy announced, her voice carrying across the backyard. This is Jason Peters. Various greetings and welcoming noises rose from the assembled guests. Mom approached with a warm smile, accepting the flowers with genuine thanks. Dad followed, extending his hand in the perfunctory way he greeted all newcomers, assessing and categorizing in a single glance. I hung back, watching the scene unfold with a strange sense of detachment. Jason was doing well, answering questions politely, complimenting the house, standing straight the way he did when he was nervous at the store. Then his gaze swept the backyard and landed on me. The recognition was immediate. His eyes widened, mouth opening in surprise before spreading into a genuine smile of relief at seeing a familiar face. "Oh, hey boss," he called across the yard, raising his hand in greeting. The effect was instantaneous. Conversations halted. Heads turned. A glass clinked as someone set it down too hard. Dad's head snapped toward me, then back to Jason, his brow furrowed in confusion. Mom, in the middle of arranging Jason's flowers in a vase, froze completely, a fork she'd been using to adjust the stems clattering to the patio table. Amy looked between Jason and me, comprehension dawning on her face. "Boss?" she repeated. "Wait, you two know each other?" Jason nodded enthusiastically, oblivious to the sudden tension. "Yeah. Mr. Miller owns the hardware store where I work. Best boss I've ever had." The silence that followed was deafening. In that moment, as every eye turned to me, I realized that everything was about to change. The carefully constructed narratives, my failure, Dad's righteousness, the family shame, were crumbling under the weight of this simple truth. I wasn't a dropout working some menial job. I was boss. I was someone's employer. I was a business owner respected enough that my employee would call me out in a crowd with genuine pleasure. Dad's face had gone completely still, a sure sign of emotional turmoil beneath the surface. Mom looked like she might cry. Amy's expression hovered between shock and dawning delight. And Jason, poor clueless Jason, continued to smile at me from across the yard, completely unaware that he had just detonated a 3-year-old family conflict with a simple greeting. For what felt like an eternity, no one moved. The backyard was frozen in a tableau of shock and confusion. 20 pairs of eyes darting between me and Jason, processing this unexpected connection. The only sounds were birds chirping obliviously in the maple tree and the distant hum of a lawnmower from a neighboring yard. Jason's smile began to falter as he sensed the tension. "Did I say something wrong?" he asked, glancing uncertainly at Amy. Dad was the first to break the spell. He cleared his throat, his businessman's instinct for damage control kicking in. "I think there's been some misunderstanding," he said smoothly. "Michael doesn't own a business." The words hung in the air, a desperate attempt to maintain the narrative he'd constructed. But Jason, innocent and honest to a fault, only looked more confused. "Sure he does," he insisted. "Miller's Hardware on Oak Street. He's the owner. Has been for 3 years." Mom's hand flew to her mouth. "Miller's Hardware?" she echoed faintly. "That's yours." I nodded, finding my voice at last. "Yes. I started it after I left BU. But that's..." She trailed off, visibly struggling to reconcile this information with what she'd believed. "I've driven past that store. It's always busy. 15 employees now," I said quietly. "We're expanding to the empty storefront next door this fall." Aunt Susan let out a low whistle. Uncle Jack beamed with undisguised pride. Amy looked like she might burst with a mixture of surprise and vindication. Dad's face had gone from pale to flushed. "If this is some kind of joke..." "It's not a joke, sir," Jason interrupted, his loyalty to me apparently overriding his nervousness around Amy's father. "Mr. Miller runs the best hardware store in the county. When the big box store closed down, we got all their business. He's even on the Small Business Council for Mapleton now." Dad's mouth opened and closed, no words emerging. For perhaps the first time in his life, Robert Miller was speechless. Amy seized the moment, stepping forward to take Jason's arm. "Maybe you could tell us more about working there," she suggested brightly. "How long have you been with my brother's company?" "Almost 8 months, Jason replied, relaxing a bit. "I was just looking for a part-time job while in school, but Mr. Miller, your brother, he's taught me so much about business, customer service, even basic accounting." "Accounting?" Dad interjected sharply, unable to help himself. "Michael never had any interest in accounting." "Oh, he's really good with the books," Jason continued, oblivious to the undercurrents. "He explained the whole inventory system to me, how it ties to cash flow projections and quarterly tax planning. I'm actually thinking about adding a business minor because of him." I could almost see the gears turning in my father's head, his worldview shifting painfully as this information collided with his fixed image of me as a directionless dropout. Mom had sunk into a patio chair, still clutching the vase of flowers. You never told us, she said softly, looking at me with bewildered eyes. All this time we thought. What exactly did you think? I asked, surprising myself with the calmness in my voice. Your father said you were. She glanced at Dad, then back to me. Working odd jobs. Struggling. A ripple of discomfort passed through the gathering. Several guests suddenly became very interested in their drinks or the pattern of the patio stones. Why would he say that? I pressed, the question directed at both of them. Dad's jaw clenched. Because you walked away from a degree that would have guaranteed you a career. A future. Security. To sell hammers, I finished for him, echoing his dismissive words from our phone call. Except that's not all I do, is it, Jason? Jason, sensing he was somehow central to this family drama, straightened his shoulders. No, sir. You help people solve problems. Like when the storm hit last fall and you kept the store open around the clock. Or when you helped the elementary school build those bookshelves at cost. Or the wheelchair ramp for Mr. Gonzalez. With each example, I watched my father's rigid certainty crack a little more. These weren't the actions of a directionless failure. They were the choices of someone who had found purpose, who had built something meaningful, just not on the path he had dictated. Cousin Beth, perhaps seeking to ease the tension, asked Jason, "So what's it like working there? Is he a tough boss?" Jason grinned, relaxing as the conversation shifted to safer ground. Fair but demanding. He expects a lot, but he teaches you everything you need to know. And he's always the first one in, last one out. Sounds like someone else I know, Aunt Susan murmured, glancing meaningfully at Dad. The parallel hung in the air between us, an unexpected bridge across our differences. Dad's work ethic had always been unimpeachable. It was one of the few things I genuinely admired about him. The suggestion that I might share this quality seemed to catch him off guard. Mom, recovering somewhat from her shock, asked tentatively, "Do you enjoy it? Running the store?" The simple question caught me by surprise. No one in my family had ever asked if I was happy, only if I was successful by their narrow definition. I love it, I answered honestly. Every day is different. I'm solving problems, helping people, building something that matters to the community. You could have done all that with an engineering degree, Dad interjected, but the argument sounded hollow even to my ears. Maybe, I conceded. Or maybe I would have been miserable designing components for products I didn't care about, working for people whose values I didn't share. Jason, perhaps sensing the renewed tension, pulled out his phone. I have some pictures of the store renovation we did last spring. Mr. Miller designed the whole layout himself. He began swiping through photos and Amy leaned in to look. Oh my God, Mike, did you build those display units? They're gorgeous. She took the phone to get a better look, then passed it to Mom, who studied the images with growing wonder. You did all this? Mom asked, her voice faint. With help, I acknowledged. Dave, my master carpenter, guided the more complex woodworking. The phone made its way around the gathering, each person examining the evidence of my accomplishments. Even Mrs. Norton from next door seemed impressed, commenting, I need to stop by. Those garden tools look much better organized than at the big stores. Throughout this impromptu showcase of my business, Dad remained silent, his expression unreadable. But I could see his eyes tracking the phone as it passed from hand to hand, taking in the undeniable proof that his son wasn't the failure he'd proclaimed. Eventually the phone reached him. He stared at the screen for a long moment, swiping slowly through the photos. No one spoke. Even the birds seemed to have gone quiet, as if sensing the significance of this moment. You did the electrical work yourself? He finally asked, his voice gruff but lacking its usual dismissive edge. Yes, I replied. Got it inspected and certified first try. He nodded slightly, a gesture so small I might have missed it if I hadn't been watching so closely. It wasn't approval, not yet, but it was acknowledgement. For now that was enough. Mom, perhaps sensing a rare opening, stood up suddenly. Michael, would you help me in the kitchen? I need someone tall to reach the serving platters. It was a transparent excuse, but I welcomed the chance to escape the scrutiny of the gathering. As I followed her into the house, I heard the party conversation resume behind us, Amy's voice cheerfully drawing attention away from the family drama. In the kitchen, Mom busied herself opening cabinets, though I knew perfectly well she kept the serving platters in the buffet in the dining room. When she finally turned to face me, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. Why didn't you tell us? She asked quietly. All this time we thought. I was so worried about you. Would it have mattered? I countered. Dad had already decided I was a disappointment. He was hurt, she said. You rejected everything he thought was best for you. I rejected a future that would have made me miserable. She sighed, leaning against the counter. I drive by your store, you know. At least once a month. I never went in. I was afraid of. I don't know what I was afraid of. The admission stunned me. You knew where I worked? She nodded. I saw the sign, Miller's Hardware. I thought maybe you were just working there. I never imagined you owned it. She paused. Your father doesn't know I drive by. It would have just upset him. The realization that my mother had been secretly checking on me all this time, too afraid to approach but unwilling to completely let go, pierced through the armor I'd built around my heart. Why didn't you come in? I asked softly. I was afraid you wouldn't want to see me, she admitted. That you blamed me too for not standing up to your father. For not supporting your decision. Before I could respond, Amy appeared in the kitchen doorway. Everything okay in here? Mom quickly wiped her eyes. Just catching up. Well, you might want to come back outside, Amy said, a hint of wonder in her voice. Dad's asking Jason about the store's revenue model and expansion plans. Mom and I exchanged startled glances. He's what? I asked. Talking business, Amy confirmed with a small smile. Real business, not condescending small talk. I think he's actually impressed, even if he'd rather die than admit it. As we moved toward the door, Amy caught my arm. Did you know about Jason working for you when we started dating? I shook my head. Not until yesterday. He mentioned his girlfriend Amy and her dad, the corporate type. It wasn't hard to put together. This is all so weird, she said, half laughing. But also kind of perfect. She squeezed my arm. I'm proud of you, Mike. I always have been. As we stepped back into the sunlight, I saw Dad and Jason seated at the patio table, deep in conversation. Dad was leaning forward slightly, the posture he adopted when genuinely engaged in a topic. Jason was animated, clearly explaining something about the business, his initial nervousness replaced by enthusiasm. Quarter-over-quarter growth of about 15%. I heard him saying. And that's before the expansion. Mr. Miller thinks we could double our revenue next year with the new workshop space and community classes. Dad glanced up as we approached, his expression still guarded but with something new there. A reluctant reassessment. Our eyes met, and for the first time in years he didn't immediately look away. The facade was crumbling. Not just his illusion of my failure, but my own careful construction of independence. Of not needing their approval or connection. As much as I'd tried to convince myself otherwise, standing here in my childhood backyard, I realized a part of me had been waiting for this moment all along. The moment when they would finally see me, truly see me, for who I was, not who they'd wanted me to be. As the party continued around us, I felt a strange sense of dislocation, like I was both part of this gathering and somehow floating above it, observing the shifting dynamics of my family with new eyes. Guests gradually drifted away from our drama toward the food table, giving our family space to process this unexpected revelation. Dad stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the patio stones. Michael, he said, his voice carefully controlled. Could I have a word? In private. Not a request. Never a request with Robert Miller. I nodded, feeling a flutter of anxiety in my chest. This was the confrontation I'd been anticipating and dreading since I decided to attend. Mom shot me a worried glance, but I gave her a reassuring smile. Whatever happened next, I could handle it. Dad led the way down the stone path that wound around the side of the house to the backyard gate. We stepped through it into the small wooded area that served as a buffer between properties in this carefully planned subdivision. The shade was cooler here, dappled sunlight filtering through maple leaves. This had been my refuge as a child. A place to read, to think, to escape when Dad's expectations became too heavy. For a long moment he said nothing, just stood with his back to me, hands clasped behind him in the stance he'd perfected through decades of corporate authority. I waited, refusing to be the first to break the silence. Finally he turned. The mask of the confident executive had slipped, revealing something I'd rarely seen: uncertainty. Jason seems like a good kid, he said, surprising me with this opening. He is, I agreed cautiously. One of my best employees. Dad nodded, eyes scanning the trees rather than meeting mine. Reminds me a bit of you at that age. Before. He trailed off. Before I disappointed you? I finished for him. His jaw tightened. Before things got complicated. They didn't get complicated, Dad. I just chose a different path than the one you mapped out. A muscle twitched in his cheek. A path that appears to be working out for you. Not quite an acknowledgement of success, but closer than I'd ever expected to get. It is, I said simply. Not that you'd know since you wrote me off the moment I left BU. The words came out sharper than I'd intended, 3 years of hurt compressed into a single sentence. Dad flinched almost imperceptibly. I thought you were making a mistake, he said after a pause. Throwing away opportunities one never had. I know, I replied, softening slightly. You wanted what you thought was best for me. What I knew was best, he corrected, some of the old stubbornness resurfacing. Then more quietly, or what I believed was best anyway. The distinction wasn't lost on me. It might be the closest thing to an admission of error I'd ever hear from him. Why didn't you tell us about the store? He asked suddenly. All this time your mother's been worried sick. She thought you might be struggling working menial jobs, barely getting by. Would it have mattered? I countered. The last time we spoke you made it pretty clear what you thought of my choice. I was angry, he admitted. Disappointed. And now? He sighed heavily, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of years of misunderstanding. Now I don't know what to think. My son apparently owns a successful business I've never even seen. You could have seen it any time, I pointed out. Miller's Hardware isn't exactly hiding. It's right on Oak Street with my name on the sign. I've driven past it, he said, surprising me. Never went in. This startled me. Both my parents had been secretly checking on me, neither willing to cross the threshold, neither telling the other. The realization that Dad had at least been curious enough to drive by stirred something in me I'd long suppressed. Hope for reconciliation. Why didn't you come in? I asked, echoing the question I'd posed to Mom. Dad's expression shifted, a rare vulnerability crossing his features. Pride, I suppose. Stubbornness. He shook his head ruefully. Miller family traits, as your Uncle Jack would say. Despite everything, I found myself smiling slightly. Seems we have more in common than you thought. Dad met my eyes directly for the first time. Perhaps we do. A tentative truce settled between us, fragile but real. Not forgiveness exactly, there were too many harsh words and missed opportunities for that. But a beginning. A clearing away of falsehoods that might, eventually, allow something authentic to grow. Tell me about it, Dad said suddenly. Your business. Not the financials Jason was going on about. Why it matters to you. The question caught me off guard. Dad had always cared about metrics, outcomes, bottom lines. Never the why behind the what. It's about problem solving. I began slowly, finding my way into an explanation I'd never expected to give him. Not just selling products but helping people figure out what they actually need. Teaching them skills. Building community. As I spoke, something shifted in Dad's expression. The skepticism gradually giving way to something like reluctant understanding. I told him about the workshop space we were developing for community classes, the emergency response plan we'd created after the hurricane, the mentoring program for local high school students interested in trades. So it's not just retail, he said when I finished. It's a community center of sorts. With hammers, I added, a small attempt at humor. To my surprise, the corner of his mouth twitched upward. With hammers, he agreed. We stood in silence for a moment, the weight of unsaid things between us lightening just a fraction. Your mother will want to see it, he said finally. The store. She's welcome anytime, I replied. You both are. Dad nodded, not quite committing but no longer refusing outright. Progress of a sort. We made our way back to the party, the silence between us now contemplative rather than hostile. As we rounded the house, I saw Mom anxiously watching for our return, her face brightening with relief when she saw us both intact, no visible signs of renewed conflict. She hurried over, touching Dad's arm tentatively. Everything okay? Fine, he assured her, his tone gentler than usual. Just clearing the air a bit. Mom turned to me, hope and uncertainty warring in her expression. Michael was just telling me about his store, Dad explained before I could speak. It sounds like he's built something Significant. The carefully chosen word hung in the air between us. Not quite praise but far more than the dismissal I'd grown accustomed to. Mom's eyes filled with tears. "I'd love to see it sometime," she said, glancing between us as if afraid of reigniting tensions. "Actually," I found myself saying, "I'm hosting a small business showcase next Sunday. Local vendors, demonstrations, community outreach. You could come then if you wanted. See it in action." "We'll be there," Mom said immediately, then looked at Dad, a question in her eyes. After a beat of hesitation, he nodded. "We'll be there." As we rejoined the party, I noticed Amy watching us closely. She raised an eyebrow in silent question, and I gave her a subtle thumbs up. Her smile was radiant as she turned back to Jason, who was now chatting comfortably with Uncle Jack about fishing lures. The party atmosphere had shifted, the initial shock of Jason's revelation giving way to a curious, careful exploration of this new reality. Aunt Susan cornered me for details about the store's customer base. Cousin Beth asked if I carried the specialty garden tools she'd been seeking. Mr. Norton wondered about weatherproofing options for his deck. With each question, each genuine expression of interest, I felt a weight lifting. The burden of being the family failure, the disappointment, the cautionary tale. Here in the backyard where I'd grown up, I was suddenly being seen not as the college dropout but as a business owner, an entrepreneur, a person of substance. Later, as Mom opened my gift, her fingers traced the wood inlay of her initials with wonder. "You made this?" she asked, voice thick with emotion. "Designed it," I clarified. "Dave helped with some of the joinery." "It's beautiful," she whispered, lifting the bracelet from inside. "Oh, Michael. The charm is a house," I explained, feeling suddenly self-conscious. "Because no matter what, you always made home feel safe." Mom's eyes welled with tears. To my surprise, Dad placed a hand on her shoulder, a gesture of support I hadn't seen in years. She reached up to grasp his fingers and something passed between them, an acknowledgement, perhaps, of how close they'd come to losing me completely. As the party wound down, Jason approached me near the dessert table looking sheepish. "I think I might have caused some drama earlier," he said quietly. "I didn't realize they didn't know about the store." "Don't worry about it," I assured him. "It was time for the truth to come out. You just accelerated the timeline." He glanced over at Amy, who was helping Mom pack leftover food into containers. "So, your sister. Small world, huh?" "Very small," I agreed dryly. "Just do me a favor and don't break her heart, or we'll have another family crisis on our hands." Jason laughed, then grew serious. "Your dad grilled me about the business for like 20 minutes. Asked all kinds of questions about inventory systems and cash flow. I think I passed the test, though." "You definitely did," I confirmed, noting how Dad was now watching us from across the room, his expression thoughtful. "He doesn't waste time on things, or people he doesn't find worthwhile." As guests began to leave, Amy caught me in a quick, fierce hug. "Come for dinner next week," she whispered. "Before the showcase. Just the four of us. We need to, I don't know, process all this." I nodded, surprised by how much I wanted that. A chance to rebuild, to start again with honesty between us. Mom insisted I take leftovers, packing containers with the same care she'd shown when I left for college. Dad shook my hand formally at the door. Not a hug, we weren't there yet, but his grip was firm, his eyes direct. "Sunday," he said, a confirmation and a promise. "Sunday," I agreed. As I drove home, the evening sky darkening to purple above the familiar streets, I felt strangely light. The confrontation I'd dreaded for 3 years had come and gone, leaving behind not the smoking ruins I'd expected but the tentative framework of a bridge. A way back to family, but on new terms, honest terms, where I could be who I truly was, not who they'd expected me to be. When I reached my apartment, I sent a text to Jason. "Thanks for being my unexpected truth teller today." His reply came quickly. "Anytime, boss." I smiled at the word that had changed everything. Boss. Not failure, not disappointment, not cautionary tale. Owner. Builder. Creator. For the first time in years, I looked forward to Sunday dinner with my family. It wouldn't be perfect, too much had happened for instant healing, but it would be real. And on that honest ground, perhaps we could build something new, something stronger than what had come before. Just like I'd done with Miller's Hardware.